Reading from my book, The Breath That Moves Inside You, Dealing with Trauma, an Ayurvedic Perspective in the Yoga Way. As human beings, we have a penchant to connect. Like waves cling to shore, so we are inclined to attach. There may be seasons of low tide, an occasional desire to drift solo, or storms that strand us. But eventually, we will seek or return to a harbor. Loneliness can kill, while togetherness revives. From my friend Giovanni Frazetto. Introduction into the discussion of trauma and intercultural dialogue. An overview. Nasty things happen. Loved ones die. Accidents, illness, violent events can befall any of us. Regrettably, most of us will experience at least one violent or life-threatening event over the course of our lives, and almost all of us will experience the pain of a loved one's death. From Trauma Therapy in Context, 2012. The traumatized self. Trauma as a psychological impact has reached the daily life of everybody's understanding as a term of describing the aftermath of shock, grief, or terror. However, in contrast to the common knowledge of the term, understanding of the victims and their individual needs, reactions, and adaptations are far from it. Still, victims have to live with the stigma. It ranges from that they might have provoked an assault or attack and they should get over it, it was not that bad, or that they were weak personalities anyhow. Stigmatization of victims, doubt and disbelief are often causing more harm on the long term than the traumatizing situation itself by creating repression. These strategies, which consume significant cognitive resources, have been associated with negative effects on interpersonal, physiological, and emotional functioning from trauma therapy in context. The victim is imprisoned in shame, guilt, or denial. Stepping out of the shame trap seems to be an essential first step to self-care, responsibility for further actions, and for recovery in general. Trauma induces a constant distress to the body and the mind. This is most likely to reduce the ability of decision-making, sleep, good health, and long life. The various ways of the victim to adapt to the constant stress are often self-harming in themselves, like risky behavior, substance abuse, eating disorders, violence, or depression, only naming few. Suicide is sometimes the only way for the victim to escape the pain. In order to induce self-care, modify the stress response, initiate self-healing processes, therapists are challenged with the multiple reactions to the same stress factors of trauma, to different responses to different factors, with the multiple differences in cultures, personalities, circumstances, repetition, single trauma, codependency, addiction, self-harming, violence in order to develop successful treatments. But the treatments are numerous. There's very little research done so far to understand what kind of patient is responding to what particular kind of invention. The base for the new data published in this thesis, Society of Friends, is a small clinic for complementary medicine and naturopathy in the center of Berlin. During the last 40 years or so, I, as the founder and the head of the clinic, developed complementary or alternative treatment schemes and solutions for traumatized patients, pretty much on my own but with the best help I could get, the patients themselves. A group of assistants, apprentices, friends, and students were constantly accompanying, contributing, and observing the treatments. I started from scratch by being confronted by some patients with unexpected reactions to regular treatments. Intense studies on trauma followed, studying the recent research publications in the Western Hemisphere, classical Chinese and Japanese medicine, to Ayurveda scriptures and yoga texts concerning the topic. The foundation was established to develop a unique classification of the patient's individual needs and individual strengths. With these, for the first time published schemes, trauma PTSD treatment can be optimized. The traditional Ayurveda treatment plans were evaluated and laid out in their suitable version for the modern patients. However, the main question had to be asked from the beginning. Is it possible to truly adopt medical systems, understandings, and beliefs from other cultures? And how to discover the differences when they might as well remain invisible to an observer whose thought process is shaped by the own culture? Assuming to know what the other is talking about, and thus missing out on crucial differences, is a regular problem of intercultural studies. In the words of a Korean feminist translator Walter Benjamin, translation is a mode. Translation is an anti-neocolonial mode. She states, retranslation, a racial hybrid as a conclusion of all translation attempts, a form, a mode. This productive tension, a possible mistranslation, indicates a formative activity simultaneous to the occupation of translation's modality. An incorporeal material language transforms, reforms, conforms, deforms. Quoted from my friend Ashkan Sepavand, 2020. Would it be possible to penetrate beliefs and insights of high complexity from other cultures? Here we try to analyze the methodic and views and present on holistic approach that highlights the Western and Eastern way in order to integrate modern trauma therapy concepts, evaluate them, and use them in a holistic context of Ayurveda and yoga. Would it be possible to reveal and discover one's own assumptions, beliefs, convictions as unconfirmed concepts? Would it be possible to integrate a very different way of thinking to the dominant Western thinking in which consciousness, unconsciousness, and matter play an entirely different role in the complexity of a human being? Is it possible to see health of the individual separately from the health of the environment, the ocean, and the planet as a whole? Ayurveda imposes the duty to dedicate and contribute to universal factors as dharma, as duty. How to use the research of Western medicine within a system in which healing is more than healing of the mind or the body, but always of a mind-body continuum, as there is no real separation of those? This book is dedicated to find answers. Complex systems are philosophical inquiries enrich the cultural belief in Western culture through trade and exchange since thousands of years. However, the Jewish, Christian, Cartesian cultural heritage carries out one of the central differences in Western belief to its Eastern conception, which is the duality of mind and body. An aspect of Ayurveda is majorly important for this thesis. The fact that in Ayurveda there is no psychology as such, only psychiatry. As my professor Ram Manohar, Amrita College, Kollam, Kerala states, the mind can only be studied separately when it is insane. From an Ayurvedic perspective, body and mind are one single continuum. He says, like a vessel and ghee, they are interconnected. He says, looking at things that are the same like hot and cold, they are related as a continuum that keeps on influencing every other point on the continuum. A synthetic philosophical approach like Ayurveda can integrate an analytical approach like Western psychology, nutrition, etc. Western biomedical approach to health, however, is analytical, non-holistic, dualistic, and therefore disabled to integrate a complex system such as Ayurveda. Mind can only think of what is already known, to quote Wittgenstein. Questions can only be asked of which the answers are known. From his book, Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus. Even if a particular thought could appear groundbreaking, out of the box, but nevertheless, it is only a product of the way of cultural limited thinking works. Therefore, Ayurveda and yoga could represent a way to bridge Western and Eastern therapeutic measures and thinking. Ayurveda and yoga are empirical sciences. Their knowledge can be experienced, observed. It is inductive synthetic. Both, however, can be seen as intercultural empiric sciences as to the fact that their science of experience and the applied methods are sensational and not limited to a certain country, belief, concept, or paradigm. Experiencing, though, is bound to the concept of experiencing it. Experience can only come through diligent practice. Uniting and dividing. Different cultures are different only to a certain extent. There is always overlapping content, as all human beings share basically the same dreams and the same fears. By focusing on differences, similarities can be overseen. By focusing on similarities, differences can be missed. Both options will not serve the purpose. Instead, a middle ground must be sought, a clear and respectful open dialogue. In order to start a profound and meaningful constructive dialogue, it is necessary to clarify terms and context. Although, by translating singular words out of context, the translation cannot reflect the possible full meaning. Meaning depends on context, story, background, history, as well as on the speaker and the listener. Interpreting words instead helps to understand the background and brings the words into life. Interpreting is the interacting of the speaker and the listener. Some words are better kept in their original language in this thesis in order to avoid misinterpretations or translations out of context of an original word or term. It helps to clarify and classify the topic. The original terminology in Sanskrit allows a deep inspection into the meaning of Ayurveda as well as into the practice and philosophy of yoga. Although not all texts have been published in Sanskrit, in this thesis it is the most used primary sources language. Simplifying and mixing concepts from different traditions can induce misleading assumptions. Precise clarification of terms and concepts is crucial to start a deep and meaningful dialogue between cultures in order to realize concepts and goals. Eastern mind and medicine are based on an empirical and philosophical approach towards life, death, health, happiness, and the function of the mind itself. Empirical wisdom has been generated and collected over thousands of years, including innumerable case studies displaying success as well as failure. Empirical knowledge is not ideological. It serves no other than the interest of the patient themselves. If a system turns out to be inefficient over long periods of time, it simply disappears. Ayurveda and yoga are collections of wisdom and philosophy spanning several millennia. The effectiveness of ancient systems of knowledge and practice such as Ayurveda and yoga is proved by their continued existence. In the science and concepts of yoga and Ayurveda, the function of the mind and body continuum are revealed in clear terms as well as in practical guidance. Empirical knowledge and hundreds of techniques for self-inquiry are laid out. Physical exercise like asana and deep meditation like dhyana, breathing, pranayam, daily routine, dinacharya, and detailed description of cause and effect of thoughts and actions, karma, are structured and explained. Nutrition and lifestyle, ahara vihara, are the pillars of a system of rules and ethics that follow philosophical outlines as much as it follows the newer discoveries of the biorhythm of hormones and physiological changes. Unlike analytical Western philosophies, which analyze particles and pieces in order to study the whole object, Eastern philosophical traditions follow a so-called synthetic tradition which tries to understand form and function from the wholeness. The meaning of the word yoga is often translated as unity connection, while Ayurveda could be translated as the science of life and death. Both Ayurveda and yoga are different to Western philosophies in terms of their definition of time and space. Whilst Western concepts define a linear concept of time and space, most Eastern philosophies, Ayurveda and yoga in particular, are assuming a cyclic and rhythmic existence in which mind and matter will be repeatedly reoccur in the same way as the seasons of the year come and go, samsara. The uncountable number of even contradicting philosophies of India have not disappeared in modern days, nor have they been replaced by historical influences like imperialism or colonialism. In fact, India till today provides a wide spectrum of beliefs and philosophies ranging from mono to pantheism, tantrism and atheism. They are all actively practiced. The innumerable beliefs and traditional rituals can be described as a social experience of diversity. A country of 1.5 billion people is woven together in a system of tolerance and diversity, but often haunted by the shadow of the opposite. Intolerance and even fanatism are the other side of the historical multi-ethnic subcontinent. The philosophical and medical experiences and beliefs are joined together in Ayurveda, Unani and Siddha medicine, and other tribal medical shamanic systems, as well in the various yoga traditions like Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Tantric Yoga. This picture reflects and incorporates the multiple changes of society, better to use the term societies within the subcontinent, through invaders, natural disasters, golden ages within a historical timeline from the ancient past to present days. It accepts and integrates traditions from the highest university standards with lab tests to procedures that are summarized under the name of shamanism. From rasa shadis, refining of toxic substances so they lose their toxicity, to reciting mantras, from touch and massage therapy to sexual therapy. According to the rituals of belief or the shastras, It is possible to renounce the world or totally embrace it, allowing everything to be integrated into life and meaning. The sources of knowledge span from the high altitude of the Himalayas of Jammu and Kashmir and its influences from other Oriental traditions like Tibetan, Mongolian, Chinese traditional medicine, down to the swampy areas and green jungles of Kerala and Karnataka. It covers knowledge of medical plants and traditions from the vast deserts of Rajasthan as well as those from agricultural settlements. It integrates the cow-based medicine of Uttar Pradesh to coconut oil preparations from Sri Lanka. The inner times within India range from cultures still in Stone Age, menace in the forests of remote islands, to rocket technology and the atomic power plants along the country. It covers the majority of different medical traditions of a landmass that includes almost 1,500 official languages and about the same number of so-called minor languages and dialects, with all their knowledge and practice. In modern biomedicine, or often called Western medicine, there's a common sense of analytical observation. It includes the knowledge of germs as a paradigm and sets standards through dissection and laboratory measures. If the standard is outdated, then it will not be used anymore, but a new standard will be established. Biomedicine represents the Cartesian belief of mind and body that they are separated. Biomedicine only dates back to the 19th century, marked by the invention of vaccines and the discovery of germs. It uses, in contrast to Ayurveda's holistic view, a database of analytics and measurements to quantify a disease and the cell healing process. However, very little is known of the recovery options of the patient and of her and his self-healing ability, stamina, resilience options, etc., or even prevention through nutrition, lifestyle components like stress reduction. Although some GPs agree to psychosomatic sources of certain diseases, the knowledge of the relation of organic dysfunction and failure does not necessarily include better treatment options. Modern psychological approaches towards disease are often felt as blaming the patient and therefore are inefficient. Gabor Mate says, the view of sickness and death as a personal failure is a particularly unfortunate form of blaming the victim, from his book, When the Body Says No, Exploring the Stress-Disease Connection. He continues, how many stress be transmuted into illness, asks he. Stress is a complicated cascade of physical and biochemical responses to powerful emotional stimuli. Physiological emotions are themselves electrical, chemical, and hormonal discharges of the human nervous system. Emotions influence and are influenced by the functioning of our major organs, the integrity of our immune defense, and the workings of the many circulating biological substances that help govern the body's physical state. He says, when emotions are repressed, this inhibition disarms the body's defense against illness. He says, repression, dissociating emotions from awareness and relegating them to the unconscious realm, disorganizes and confuses our physiological defenses, so that in some people this defense goes awry, becoming the destroyer of health rather than its protector. Gabor Mate lays down all the specific measures how Western biomedicine looks at all the details. In contrast, Ayurveda always looks at the whole. Ayurveda does not even end there. It actually expands its knowledge of the person by framing them into all the interrelated connections of social relations, food, climate, age, the emotional state, the stars, whatever is affecting individual life in the endless web of creation. In conclusion, holistic medical approaches such as Ayurveda stand in opposition to approaches in which medical experts specialize on one or two medical fields. Integrating Ayurveda into a concept that reduces complex systems to analytical separation of causes is in danger of failing. Focusing on the treatment of the individual and providing complex structured multidimensional treatment plans in addition to using the knowledge of analytics could bring these two worlds together for the benefit of the patient. In fact, the knowledge of life and death and the inquiries into consciousness, as in yoga, should be studied with respect in order to understand recovery, resilience, and healing in a holistic rather than a reductionist way. As Ram Manohar states, body and mind are one continuum. When it comes to trauma, PTS and PTSD, the analysis of the differences in the definitions of mental health, mind and body, as well as in Western trauma psychology, is essential. The aim of this book is to inquire whether yoga and Ayurveda provide suitable methodological approaches to diagnose individually and treat trauma in an individually tailored treatment plan. Starting from the assumption that grief, sadness, anxiety, pain, and fear are unavoidable and that they are an integral part of life, the question that has to be answered is why human beings take different times to recover from trauma. Some individuals appear to recover quickly, while others recover only after a prolonged time or even not at all. It is to prove here that the complex socio-psycho-philosophical system of Ayurveda and yoga provide answers. Adaptation to the deep pain can lead to persistent socio-psycho-philosophical changes of the individual. Speaking about trauma in general is actually mostly speaking about the adaptation to trauma. Adaptation is an uncomfortable way of living by actually trying to avoid unwanted memories. It feels comfortable in the beginning as the avoidance of emotional loaded memories reduces stress. But healing from the traumatic injury is not taking place. Further structured avoidance plans of the patient need more and more strategic behavior which will consume awareness and energy. The patient is not getting any closer to recovery through avoidance. Distress and psychophysiological changes in the person lead to various patterns of avoidance. These patterns occur as well in PTSD as in post-traumatic stress disorder, as in post-traumatic depression. However, some patients seem to not experience any distress at all, recover quickly, or show other signs of successfully coping with the survival of the traumatic injury. It is crucial to understand why and how certain people seem to develop better strategies of integrating the past into their personal narrative. Ayurveda can provide answers by detailed predicting schemes of possible reactions of certain personality types, here called dosha and guna types. After intensive years of study at the Society of Friends laid out tables of behavior, responsiveness and adaptation that allow the therapist more efficient decision making for better treatment options. At the same time, My research explicitly analyzes some of the key treatment methods from both Ayurveda and yoga and pranayama and explains the proper use and shows my failures. As both victims of trauma and therapists long for solutions, change is needed in the classical psychiatric treatments. Medications overload patients with unwanted side effects, often without even providing a long-term solution. Psychotherapy often ends too early, as health insurance providers often refuse further payment when the patient is not recovering or the patient is not responding to the particular method. The example of Svenjo, my patient, in the chapter Case Studies will illustrate the impact of social insurances on recovery and survival. It often remains unclear what actually can be considered healing from trauma, as the acceptance and adaptation to a chaotic world, a messy lifestyle, an unhappy relationship cannot be considered a sign of a healthy mental state. Adapting through therapy to an unhealthy and devaluating, disrespectful, and toxic environment is definitely not a sign of recovery, but the patient fits in again. Or could the inability to accept and adapt to the circumstances in which the person is living and actually be the sign of mental recovery? Many trauma survivors already disguise themselves in so-called normal behavior. They often disappear in camouflaged, norm-filled and adapted lifestyle. Many of them are even overachievers and develop symptoms like compulsive behavior disorder. The deep pain often remains undetected, as a always very clean house, a very busy late night still working mom, an extra busy school kid are society role models of success. It can take years until the tragedy behind those norm over-fulfilling behavior might be discovered as an adaptation, as a way to explain the lack of friends and intimacy, too busy, as a measure to try and keep life under control. Drug addicts, patients with eating disorder and compulsive behavior disorder report that their behavior actually gave them a sense of control. Living has turned into a function opposed to an experience. Meaning in life, positive side effect of holistic treatments with Ayurveda and yoga. Meaning making as an important focus in Ayurveda. Meaning making had become a key tool in the treatments in my society of friends, although there was no initially planned redirecting towards meaning in life. Meaning in life seemed to have been a side effect of a successful treatment. Patients reported the change of attitude and increasing duration of experienced satisfaction or happiness. It is said a related construct to a priori beliefs in meaning making proposed an important distinction is between the effort to find meaning making efforts versus arriving at a meaning made at one hand. It appears that a persistent search for a meaning is typically associated with considerably worse adjustment to PTE, likely because it reflects a continued anxious preoccupation with the event. On the other hand, initial evidence does suggest that meaning made, that is, arriving at some cognitive resolution of the event, is associated with favorable effects on adjustment following a PTE, likely because it allows the person to integrate the experience and to move on from it. From the book, Trauma Therapy and Context, 2011. The above explains the effects, but the research how to achieve the meaning-making is far from studied in the West. However, it is the key tool of Ayurvedic and yogic procedures. As quite a few patients were on recovery from drug addiction, this aspect was particularly important. As drug, alcohol addiction, as well as any other addictive behavior, shopping, cutting, gambling, sex, food, etc., led to quick relief from unpleasant feelings and led the patients into a quick change of their emotional state, high or even peak. It has been very difficult in the past, before Ayurvedic and yoga treatments have been introduced to the clinic, to communicate otherwise that a life without substance addiction is not necessarily experienced as more of a high life, but mostly just a life without substance abuse and without the dopamine rush as a reward, without bliss or ecstasy. Slow relaxation instead might be experienced, which translates as reduced dissociation and improvement of self-control of emotions, affects, and distress reduction. Peak experiences, explains Joel Voss, are specific moments of euphoric mental state when an individual actualizes oneself. An individual in a peak experience will lose the sense of time and space, feels part of a larger whole or harmony, is fully in the moment and fully functioning by using all capacities and capabilities, does not experience struggle or fear, but feels spontaneous, creative, and free. However, they expect to continuously experience exceptional moments. From Joel Voss, Meaning in Life, 2018. Ayurveda might reconstruct feelings that are naturally inherited by the child, mindfulness and meaning. When we are living a meaningful life, we often feel the here and now. This is called mindfulness, which can be defined as an individual being completely grounded in the present moment by having an intentionally focused awareness of the immediate experience. Focused awareness means that someone has a conscious moment-by-moment attention to situational elements of an experience such as thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and surroundings. This book presents my personal studies over the last 40 years in order to try to provide answers to the question if Ayurveda and yoga can possibly provide the qualities for healing and if the procedures can be conducted for the Western patient living in a modern world.